What's up, you guys? I'm Dan, this is Frugal Not Cheap, and today we'll talk about how to retire early, pay just 1.8% in taxes, and access our retirement funds before the age of 59 and a half. So in my last video, we talked about my plan to take advantage of geographical arbitrage and retire in Bangkok, Thailand. I had come up with a budget of $21,600 after we trimmed a little bit of fat from the initial budget. But then the question is, of course, how am I going to actually pay for all this stuff? How am I going to retire early when, as we know, there's a 10% penalty if you try to withdraw from IRAs, a traditional IRA or traditional 401k accounts before the age of 59 and a half? And then how the heck also are we going to pay just 1.8% in taxes? So we'll start with accessing the retirement accounts early. That's probably the bigger question and more important one to sort out first, especially because I'll have about 56% of my accounts roughly in tax advantage accounts, traditional tax advantage accounts, that there is a penalty for if we try to take funds out early. So there are a couple of methods that can be done. One which is a lot less inflexible, called the 72T rule. What I'll be taking advantage of is a part of the tax code that we call the Roth conversion ladder. So the basic idea here is that when I retire, that will generate an event so that I can convert my 401k from my job into a traditional IRA. It's going from traditional to traditional, so there's absolutely no tax implications at that stage. Normally you wouldn't necessarily want to do this because there are some legal protections that are stronger for 401ks than they are for IRAs, but if you want to employ the strategy that I'll be using, then you need to be able to convert those funds from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. So that's exactly the strategy, is that every year you convert the amount of money that you're going to need in 5 years' time from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. And of course, this counts as taxable income for that year. So this is something that you don't want to do while you're still working, because then you're at a much higher tax rate because you've got all of your wage income from your job or whatever it is that you're doing. And then on top of that, you also have these Roth conversions, right? A conversion from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. So why 5 years? The reason why is that the tax code says that if you convert to Roth and then let those funds sit for 5 years, then after those 5 years you can withdraw them without any kind of a penalty. So of course this means that we have a 5-year gap from retirement till the time that we could start potentially withdrawing these converted Roth funds. In order to bridge that gap, you need to either have funds in your Roth account already, or have funds in your savings account or taxable brokerage account, an after-tax account, in order to bridge that gap. So what we do is every year we convert how much we're going to need in 5 years from traditional to Roth. Then the following year, adjusted for inflation, we're going to convert what we're going to need 6 years from the beginning, and so on and so forth. So you can kind of see that in this table. I've kind of color-coded where the conversion happens, and then where the potential withdrawal is going to happen in the future, or anyway, when those funds are going to be available to withdraw without any penalty. So it's a really cool strategy, I think. It does, of course, mean you have to think ahead 5 years. And I put all the numbers in today's dollars. What we would actually do in practice is to adjust all those numbers for expected inflation over that period. All right, so that's my strategy. Eventually, I'll be able to convert all of, or at least much of, my traditional 401k and IRA funds into Roth funds, which can then grow tax-free, which is really, really cool. So how is it that I'm going to pay only 1.8% in taxes, right? That's ridiculously low. Well, as we talked about before, what I have to pay is tax on the conversion. So that's going to be an inflation adjusted, but we'll just use today's dollars for everything. I'll convert $21,600 in the first year. Then on top of that, of course, I've got some income that is taxable, and I can't choose whether or not to receive it, and those are dividends. Now, this comes back to my video about dividends and why I prefer to employ a total return strategy over a dividend strategy. Well, anyway, you can watch the video for more on that, but one of the reasons is that I have no choice but to have these dividends come in, and of course they are taxable. So the great thing about the tax code, though, at least right now, is that both dividends and long-term capital gains are not taxable up to an income of $40,000. That doesn't apply, though, to the conversion. So we will have to pay a little bit of tax on that $21,600 conversion. I'm estimating that we'll have about $4,300 in dividends. But then, of course, we have the standard deduction, which we can take off of our income, which is right now $12,550. So again, the limit was $40,000, so we can remove from that $40,000 our $21,600, then the $4,300 in dividends, and then add back the standard deduction, and that leaves us with the ability to realize long-term capital gains of $26,630 and pay zero tax on those dividends and capital gains. That ends up being a tax bill of just $963. I used a handy AARP 1040 calculator. You can look that up online. I will put the link in the description below if you'd like to use it. Now, an important point to make about these long-term capital gains. So where they're coming from is out of my taxable brokerage account, and they're coming from selling off some stocks and then using that to fund my expenses for these first 5 years, and then even beyond that if I want to, because I'll be retiring hopefully fairly young, and it might be more important to have the funds growing tax-free in the Roth than it is to pay the tax bill, right? Which again is zero anyway. So why not go ahead and take that out of my taxable brokerage account. It'll increase my cost basis, which is a good thing for our taxes later on. And of course, when we sell these stocks, we don't necessarily the amount of funds that we're withdrawing from the brokerage account and the long-term capital gains amount are not the same, right? Because if it's a really old share that's appreciated a ton, then you'll realize a lot of capital gains for potentially the same amount of money as a share that you bought like 2 weeks ago that hasn't yet had time to appreciate very much, right? So you can play with lot identification, or maybe a first in, first out, or last in, first out, rather, accounting strategy in order to minimize those long-term capital gains. But in my case, what I'll be trying to do is to get as close to that $26,630 in long-term capital gains while still pulling out enough for me to live on. This way we end up paying only $963 in taxes on $52,550 in income, or just 1.8%. So I think that's pretty amazing that we'll be able to retire early, pay a very, very low tax rate, and also be able to access retirement accounts well before the traditional age of retirement. So the next question that remains is, how are we going to build a portfolio up that's going to be able to pay for these $21,600 a year? And then also, how do we know whether that portfolio is going to be safe to last throughout the retirement? And that's going to be the topic of next week's video. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.